Well, thank you for joining us. We are in week 6 of our series Love Letter, and that's just we're walking through the letter of 1 John. And so we're just going to jump in here because right now we are at chapter 4, and so in this video we're just going to just kind of do an overview of that. So right from the start, he's pretty much talking about false prophets.
False prophets. So, was that a big problem that John was addressing in this church, or this? I know from reading Paul's letters, it seemed to creep in after sort of Paul or whatever apostle started the church, got them going, and then there'd be sort of false teachers kind of sneak their way in.
Yeah, I mean, some of the reason for writing this, there is some division, and earlier in the letter, I think around chapter 2, if I'm not mistaken, there is talk about those who are sort of denying a specific truths about Jesus. In this case, the humanity side of Jesus. But the whole idea of false prophets, that's nothing new in the warning. I mean, you can go back to Moses in Deuteronomy giving instruction how to recognize a true prophet.
Yeah.
So, obviously meaning that there's some false ones out there. And Jesus himself warned about false prophets. And so really in this, is John is saying use discernment, because false prophets are out there. They're probably very aware of them because he's talking them to a bit about it. And basically that whole idea of you don't need to blindly accept what that individual might be saying.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's still pretty common today. If someone has a degree after their name or they're a highly charismatic person, it's easy to just believe what they say because we don't really want to have to think for ourselves lots of times. And I like in the book of Acts records this kind of discernment when Paul and Silas were in the town of Berea, and they were preaching there. And it says the people of Berea were open-minded, more open-minded than those in Thessalonica where they'd just come from. And they were eagerly listening to Paul's message, but they didn't just accept it blindly. They searched the scriptures day after day to see if Paul and Silas were teaching truth. So that's interesting. We kind of, that is in there, but it's like one sentence and we don't always think about what is happening here. But Paul and Silas they're teaching about Jesus, and they're like, they're looking it up to make sure.
Well, it's a great way of talking about what it means to definitely I think what you see in Acts, definitely in John, I think it's not the idea of being open-minded. Still means you can check their work.
Yeah.
The Bereans checked Paul's work. And so okay, this sounds really, really good. We need to do some research on that.
Yeah.
And that's,
they were presenting a pretty radical idea as Jews. They would have, believed in the Torah and Moses and the Old Testament. And, they may have been aware of some of the prophecies, but they may not have been aware that Jesus was the fulfillment of those prophecies, and that's what Paul was claiming. Being a Pharisee himself, he was making those arguments, but it's interesting that they did do the homework to check up on it.
Yeah, and Paul would have had the pedigree, if you will, of being a Pharisee. He's coming there they would have recognized, you know what you're talking about. You studied this. And so open-mindedness still includes discernment, and open-mindedness still requires caution. And that's what John is giving here. And he kind of gives a little simple test to help in this discernment, basically I would say based on what the readers are experiencing, and that's just the Jesus test.
And what's the Jesus test?
Well, I think Constantine Campbell writes that, I think this is a good way. He goes, a simple test to recognize the Spirit of God, proper acknowledgement of who Jesus is and where he is from. Any spirit that fails this test is not from God. And so I think
when we say proper acknowledgement of who Jesus is, he is the Son of God.
He's the Son of God. He's sent by God.
Sent by God. He's fully God and fully human.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's a lot we can go into. We won't go in right now, but what are possible thoughts or beliefs that could have been fight against at that time. But it's really this whole idea, the who he is, the truth, acknowledging that where he came from. And this is even good for us today. Yeah. And there's other criteria I think that is good. To measure if someone's truly inspired or not a false prophet, inspired by the Spirit. A good one to add to that is is loving one another,
Yeah.
which obviously what John is actually going to get into.
And it's part of the whole book up to this point.
Exactly.
It's very
high. It's very much acknowledging. I mean, truthfully, we call it love letter because love is the absolute theme of this letter, followed extremely closely. Followed probably the bad word because it's interconnected. The truth of Jesus.
Yeah.
Like it's truth. It's love, it's truth, light is another one there, and it's just like it's not like three separate topics. It's three separate topics, but they're intertwined.
Yeah. And I think you're right. This is a good test for us today because we often hear of people who talk about Jesus as a man. Mm-hmm. They don't recognize any sort of divinity or where he comes from, other than just he was some sort of enlightened man and had some good things to say, for which they can agree with, but. I think it kind of misses the whole point of Jesus if we don't recognize his divinity.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the idea of like, these false prophets, these are inspired by some other spirit. Mm-hmm. I love that there is this, basically this occurs that the spirit of the God that lives in the children of God is greater than those that might be inspiring these false prophets or those that are in the world. And so when it comes to these false prophets and all that, it's a test, but you don't need to fear.
Yeah.
And the way I kind of took it is like, he's a warning, again, of these false prophets and the spirits that might be motivating them, but he's also encouraging that this doesn't need to dominate their attention and energy. Yeah, be aware, test, but don't let it dominate all of that. Especially if it starts to affect our love for one another.
Yeah. If we just become suspicious of each other and of everything that's being said, then that isn't what it's supposed to be like.
Yeah, well, it can garner all of the attention or more of the attention than it needs to.
Sure.
Like, yes, it needs some, but hey, like, let's just remember that the Spirit of God is so much stronger.
Mm-hmm. And then we move into the next part of the chapter where John kind of discusses the motives false prophets might have.
Well, not the motives false prophets might have so much as the motives we need to have.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I mean, definitely is there because he does talk about fear and hate, and absolutely those are some of the motives that they're going to have. But he's bringing it like this letter. He's just it's a circular thing. He's coming back to love. So there really should be no surprise.
Yep.
That he's coming back to it because again, it's a major theme, and our motive is love, and a love that comes from God.
Sure, but if a false prophet is promoting something other than love,
you question whether he knows God at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's just it.
Yeah, it's just it.
Even if he uses a lot of right words and that sound great.
John is using our motivation as a basis of how we should judge the people that we listen to and take.
Absolutely. And each other, period.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, he states this in verse 8, like he just said, God is love. So he poses that statement. If anyone doesn't love, as we just sort of said, he doesn't know God.
Yeah. So if someone's promoting violence or exclusion, then those are not things from God.
We're not saying that thing is God.
Yeah.
Again, and for John's evidence of knowing God fully, it is we know it's God fully, and it's evident in the love we have for each other. If one truly loves God, they will show and truly love others.
Now, the love others that John is talking about here primarily is loving other followers of Jesus. Because
in this case, absolutely.
Because Jesus said that people will know you are my disciples because of your love for one another. The one another there is other followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
That's not saying we don't love our neighbor. And Jesus even talks in the Sermon on the Mount about loving our enemies, but the focus here is loving others in the Jesus.
Yeah, I think we got to remember as much as we talk about, they will know us. Jesus saying they will know you are my disciples because of your love for each other. Yeah, Jesus does say that. He also says love your enemies. He also says love your neighbor.
Yeah.
But here, John is really talking about the community.
Yeah.
So much here, and so the community is defined by loving one another. Then you get the question, what is the motivating factor to love one another? And it's not the love we receive from others in the community. Though that can be hopefully fairly motivating. It is really the love that comes from God.
Yeah. It's God's character.
Yeah. Verse 10, this is real love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son as a sacrifice to take away our sins. And this moves kind of into verse 19, which says, we love each other because he loved us first.
Right. So as a byproduct of following Jesus and accepting God's love, we in turn love others.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's it's his nature. And so if it's his nature, if we become followers of him, it needs to start to encompass our nature as well.
And that's part of the work of the Holy Spirit and transformation that happens to us as being followers of Jesus that we've talked about many times.
Yeah. And I would say the difference right here is, again, like because love has been just sort of everywhere in this letter, he's instructed, he's encouraged, but here it's really focusing on the motivation is love and the source of love.
Yeah.
Coming back to God, he is love, verse 16, and it kind of makes sense why John talks about the false prophets kind of leading into this discourse, because as we sort of said, there might be very likely promoting more things like fear and hate. And he says, hey, false prophets, they're becoming, we got to be careful of them because they're going to lead us away from love. And we can't do that because love is such an important aspect of God. Therefore, it's an important aspect of our group and of our group identity is to love. So, when anyone starts to promote things like fear, that we need to do certain things a certain way in order to get anything resembling love of God.
That's earning love.
That's earning love.
Yeah, and it's very clear. I know we'll probably discuss this in the next podcast, and we've probably discussed it in previous ones too. But when you have to earn love, then it really isn't love. It's not God's love.
No, it's. I think it's rightly, when we see a lot of translations, they go to the fear. Did I do the right thing? Did I do enough of the right thing? All of those sort of things is, what if I didn't do? What's going to happen? It's sort of like it's not fear. There's no fear in this. It's love. It actually starts with God. We didn't do anything.
Yeah,
love didn't start with us. It starts with Him. And I think it makes sense for me this way. I look at it like a parent with a child, or maybe even your fur baby.
Yep.
If you don't
have children.
Well, yeah, if you don't have children, fur babies. We start to love simply because they are.
They exist. Yeah.
And I think of my daughter Addison when she was a baby. There's obviously you change lots of diapers, but there's one. It
sticks out in your mind.
Well, it was so gross. It was disgusting. And I remember it happened at a friend's house. I'm taking her in the living room, putting her on the couch, and being absolutely disgusted by what could come out of this beautiful child's body. And everyone walking in and just laughing at me because I really was, it's like, this is really gross and nobody would help me.
You weren't having a good time.
I was not having a good time. And then you're trying to keep it contained because it was not doing that well. But here's the thing, she didn't do anything. In fact, anything she could give me was disgusting.
Yeah.
But I to this day, it's about how much that love her, and I think that's what we see when we see John 3:16. God so loved the world that He gave His only Son. What did the world do
to deserve it?
Yeah, it didn't do anything. Then in Romans 5:8, but God showed His great love by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. So while we were even doing a whole lot of things that were the exact opposite of being deserving, He still sent love, and it's because it's who He is. It's extension of who He is. It originates from Him. It's really important that because He is love and it originates from Him, He gets to define it. And John many times I think defines it by understanding who Jesus is and what He did.
Yeah, and I remember in part of we're doing a Bible reading this week at home with my wife Mila, and we're doing one of the Bible Project ones, and this came out very clear that defining good and evil and defining love from God's perspective and from how Jesus was an example of that is really by sacrifice and serving. Yeah. And those are the characteristics. And lots of times, we see people promise things like peace, but peace comes through violence or those kinds of things where Jesus was the opposite of it. Yeah. It was through self-sacrifice and serving.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When we talk about love, I think we need to understand that's what we're saying. Mm-hmm. Just because love it can be defined so many ways. It's just sort of like when we are saying love, we are saying what we see in Jesus, and what we see in Jesus is that he attached himself to these people, and he sacrificed.
Yeah, definitely,
and served, and that's the kind of love that we do. So, Samuel Nagawa writes how love is a distinctive characteristic of the believer simply because it is a distinctive characteristic of God. Mm-hmm. And so that's the source. That's the reason. That's the motivation. Why do we love? Because he first loved us. And we remain in that love. And it's the thing that hopefully gives us life. Mm-hmm. And then we extend it to those around us. And I do like that idea of extending those around us because it's like it's not just about we are giving love. If it's that love each other community, you are giving and it's this back and forth thing that's happening that is not just about what can I give? Just give. But if you're in that
too,
that interconnected community, it's all of that's happening.
Mm-hmm. And that's what really I think makes the Christian community idea really unique.
Yeah, because when we want to do that, when we want to kind of know the love and know God, we are compelled to live it out with each other, and that's a real kind of knowledge of it. Verse 12 reads like this: it says, "No one has ever seen God. But if we love each other, God lives in us, and his love is brought to full expression in us." And Constantine Campbell writes it kind of when referring to kind of this verse. He said, "God's love is made complete in us when we love one another. Mm-hmm. This does not mean that his love is somehow incomplete unless believers love each other. It means rather that God's love comes to full fruition in our lives when we love others. It is the in us that is emphasized here. By loving one another, God's love is manifest in us."
Oh, I really like that. Yeah.
So when we love each other, each of us can experience God's love and know him so much more. Mm-hmm. And that means fear and hate have no place.
No place in the community at all. Yeah. Oh, that's a great way to sort of bring this part to a close. And so thank you very much for joining us today. And hopefully you got something helpful out of this. And please leave us a comment if you did. And as always, we encourage you to discuss what we've been talking about today. And you could even be like those Bereans we talked about and check it out for yourself to see what we're talking about is actually true. And please leave us a comment. And we would love to talk with you in the comments about this. And so again, if you appreciate this podcast and this series, please give us a like and subscribe so we can continue to bring more of this content. Thanks again for being with us today.